And we're on.
Okay.
Hello.
This is the first podcast that we're recording since we went live with our podcast to the world.
It's
Again.
True. Again,
3 years later.
yeah. I mean, that first one was a bit of a like, hey, let's put this recording that we'd made, you surreptitiously made, actually, to be fair.
Yes.
And put it up, and some people liked it. But this is the podcast anyway, and we're on episode 4.
Yeah. And I was reflecting on what I'd now looked up to be called the observer effect.
Right.
Which is when something is observed, it changes.
Yes,
And
the act of observation changes that which is being observed.
yeah, and just that, we've talked about this a number of times, but I wanted to talk about it here of, why we're doing this podcast, where it came from, what, the reason why we're sat here, really. And I think at its most fundamental, the reason we're sat here is because we talk a lot.
We talk a lot. Yeah, we do. It's true.
And
we're verbose.
What we talk about is an exploration of awakening and what that means and what that looks like and all sorts of stuff. And in that exploration, it's... And this is where the observer effect comes in. We are just privately talking together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a whole other thing to to explore in private versus explore when you have an audience.
Right.
And ideally, it wouldn't be any different. But as you pointed out the other day, there's a certain looseness that we have when
loosey-goosey.
Yeah, where we're talking just together. We have a shorthand. We have had hours of conversation, so often they build on each other of principles that we've already talked about. And so obviously that needs to not be quite that way when we're talking to other people that will listen as well. But the thing that I don't want to get lost, and I don't know how we're going to navigate this, is the innocence of inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
And the necessity of that, whereby you can delve into a topic and really pull apart what you think you know. Because to me, that is what inquiry in its essence is. You go beyond your assumptions and you take a look at and observe what is true.
Yeah.
And you can do that silently within yourself, or obviously you can do it in discourse. And so I don't want to lose the innocence of that inquiry that we do together, where it's that middle way of the looseness of that inquiry that we do together because of the familiarity, but also the ability to really get into something that is fresh and unexplored, maybe.
Well, I wonder... What comes to mind is the idea that it's good to continue to dispel the myth that awakening gives you all the answers automatically. Like all the answers are immediately online. It's like a manual of reality gets imprinted on your brain, and you become like a spiritual Google. That what about this? What about that? Well, that. And is you talking about this inquiry, the continued inquiry, is after awakening is on a different footing, because clarity is present. Yeah. Because
the seed of everything is present because it's been with that clarity, there's no occlusion or distortion. So the seed is there, but the seed might not be unpacked yet.
Right. So we get to look much more with greater dispassion, with greater clarity, and see what's going on. But it might be some aspect of reality that we haven't even looked at yet. Yeah, because
there's been no need for it. Maybe sometimes
because awakening is about the onlining of that clarity, of the presence of the pure observer, the pure awareness as self, as being the foundation and the backdrop, let's say, of phenomenal reality. So that's that. as you say, so the seeds of realities available to be observed,
Yes.
basically, and that's
Yes.
what we're. I guess that's what we're aiming
Yeah, there's
to
no
do.
great knowledge that needs to go out, a textbook that you've got to devour. There's no great, imagination that you've got to have. When what we're talking about is observable.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you brought up the observer principle. Now that's a science. I think it's quantum science that says. I might be completely wrong. Any scientists out there, let me know. But the idea is that the act of observation, if you're observing a particle or a wave, or you're observing some phenomena, that the very act of observing introduces an element into that and changes changes that. And I like to think that self-inquiry is entirely scientific, because it's about as well as you can, and then ultimately truly establishing the true observer, the witness, the consciousness that doesn't even touch the phenomena that arises. It is the pure observer, and that's why enlightenment is about reality. It's about seeing things as they are. And the only way you're going to see things as you are is, in a sense, to sort of transcend the phenomenal field and look at it without interfering with it, and only being itself. Only consciousness can do that.
Yeah, because the ego fundamentally is a distortion. It's an unclear seeing of reality. From that level or from that ground, you can never fully have that clarity, because it in itself is a distortion, is a misapprehension. Is that the right word? Yeah, of life.
Misapprehension, misperception, misconception.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're, but what you're talking about here is, in terms of the observer principle, is that we sitting down having conversations with ourselves, and we're all loosey goosey, but we're deeply inquiring, but we obviously have a shorthand the way that we communicate with each other.
Yeah. 18 years later or whatever it's been, and
that's fine. And not only, yes, you don't want to be. No one shares that shorthand with us, so we're going to do our best to just naturally just express in a way that might be more comprehensible to whoever's listening. But the idea that someone might be, so we put this out last week, put 2 episodes out.
One was new, one was old.
One was new, one was a little bit older.
Yeah, February.
And then immediately we've got a bunch of subscribers, a modest amount of subscribers, but dozens. And so now I go, oh, someone's listening to this. Someone's actually,
yeah.
So yeah, I don't like you say, you don't want to lose that naturalness though. So so we're gonna try to be natural. Oh, natural. So what's going on with you? What's on your
so for me,
mind?
Something that is coming up, and it came up so I just finished a retreat, so there's actually a lot there for me right now. I mean, there's always a lot there for me in some ways, but yeah, one thing that was coming up in the retreat, and it was this thing of how people can project into the void. And what was further to that, let's say, is the uncomfortableness of ambiguity.
Right.
And it's funny that we're talking about trying to keep the innocence and yet be clear. This topic of ambiguity, I think, is.
So let's put some context to that then. So, what specifically we're talking about? What's a good example of that? Well, let's take. Say you reach out to someone in some way. Say you email someone, and they don't get back to you.
Yeah.
the psychological mind tends to want to fill that void.
Totally.
You don't know what the other person's thinking, feeling. We had a good conversation about this, actually, so see if we can kind of recover some of it. The mind was just what doesn't like not knowing.
Not at all.
And if an email goes unanswered, for example, but and you're sort of expecting a response or whatever, you can really use that as to sort of witness your own projections into that void of knowing. And there's so many different dimensions to this. One of them is that you can watch that the habit that the mind really does not like the ambiguity of not knowing. And
because the mind deals in finite resource. It's a finite resource. It deals in certainties. It's an object-based discrimination. A and B, it's able to discern. But it's the mind is not in itself very comfortable or works in the realm of the unknown. It's all about the known.
Not having answers.
Yeah.
But it's a you can see that, and it's a great learning opportunity when you do that to witness your own processes and how first that the mind does tend to want to generate answers and make conclusions.
Anything is better than nothing.
Anything
is better than the unknown, and it's really fascinating to watch. It's really very eye-opening, I think, to see just how uncomfortable the mind is with the unknown. Yeah,
just can't hold, most people just can't, the mind doesn't want to, we don't want to, however you want to look at it, just rest in that unknowing.
Yeah, that ambiguity.
Just
that liminal.
Remain in that liminal openness.
Love that word.
Liminal, yeah. And so it, again, we're talking about, self-inquiry being the ability to observe what's true in our experience, and we can observe that discomfort in regard to how the mind just really demands to know.
And it's not just the mind, it's a body. It's like mind and body there. That discomfort, that unknowingness is not just a theoretical, conceptual uncomfortableness. It's a felt uncomfortableness. It's a feeling. It's a sensation. It's an energetic uncomfortableness that goes along with in sort of marriage with the mind there.
Yeah, and it's it's really because we've not become accustomed to or trained ourselves or unlearned those.
There's the crux of it.
The habit of discomfort. Yeah. To settle into the unknowing, which is really our natural state.
Yeah.
It's non-conceptual. It's open. It's non-resolved to point values.
It's all possibilities.
It's all possibilities, but none particular.
Yes, exactly.
At
its heart, it's the
gap. It's the gap of consciousness. It's the gap of the self.
It's the unmanifest that is yet. It's not that it's a negation or a nothing. It's yet to be fully realized into potentiality. It's entire. Again, we come to the principle of the seed. It contains all possibilities within that gap. Is everything, and yet at that moment, everything at rest.
Yes, nothing in particular, but the ego desperately wants, the ego mind desperately wants to sort of resolve it, to find some answers. So, but there's another dimension to that, using that example of someone, say, not getting back to you, and you really, if you look, you just don't know. You don't know why is that person not responding to me? All these projections start. And that in itself is an observation. You go, oh, well, these projections are
and they can be self-recriminatory or
this is it.
Other,
You can start to look then at the different flavors of your projections into this void, into this field of not knowing. What is it? Oh, it's because I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
Or they hate me.
Yeah.
Or
Some are about them, some are about you.
They're lazy, or they don't care, or they don't. And so we can really we can see the nature of someone else's projections, of our projections on, as you say, on someone else, the projections that speak to us, the projections that speak to our view of them.
Yeah.
But this is. I feel you can expand this. I feel you can take this this principle. We use this idea that a void presents itself, a void where it becomes obvious that you don't know something, you don't know, some situation you don't understand. There's a void. You're not getting any response. And instead of waiting patiently, sitting in silence, allowing the not knowing to be.
Yeah.
Allowing life to, take its time to deliver further information on the situation. But it's about being comfortable. It'd be about being comfortable in that not knowing. And I can't remember who said this. It was, some philosopher or I don't know, teacher or whatever, said, the great problem with the world is that people can't sit in a room quietly for 5 minutes on their own.
Yeah.
We're so resistant to sitting in that silent, open, ambiguous, non-conceptual space of being.
Yeah. And this comes down to, I think, everything. If you're uncomfortable sitting in the silence of your own being, I think there's where you need to look first.
Yeah. And so the things then you'll do to not have that experience, to create some trouble.
And I think it often comes down to quite an existential thing of the fear of the unknown and the lack of control of it all, because the mind is very much wanting to sort of navigate and control and manage life, and have that certainty. It all comes down to that sort of certainty of life. I know. So it's a safety, a sense of wanting safety in life. And actually, to sit in that beingness is the very opposite of certainty. And so then you're called to find a different kind of safety, not safety in the material sense of it, safety in the sense of knowingness, but safety in the heart of beingness, that sense of I exist. And that's a different kind of safety altogether, because it's not reliant on anything or anyone. So I think it comes down to fear of uncertainty.
Sitting in our own quietness, absent thought. I mean, what comes to mind is that actually when you do it, it's really beautiful. It's quite, when the recognition of that, I'll stick with it, the non-conceptual, being without thinking and doing.
It's far from something to be afraid of. It's only the mind that is afraid of, well, who am I if I'm doing nothing? Who am I? I won't exist in the sense that I think I am. But it's beautiful. It is beautiful. It's the most charming. We've talked about this word a lot. The charm of that sort of sinking into one's own self, one's own beingness, is and one's own silence.
Well, I was talking with someone the other day, and we were talking about their meditation practice, and I was asking them about what's your meditation practice, and it was just a grimace came to the I try, and I'm really and I'm really trying to make it happen. I sit there and force myself to but it's a bit of a strain, and so I don't really want to do it, and my instinct, my response is no. You're doing it wrong. With all respectfully, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Because let's say, the purpose of meditation. I mean, there's different methods, different techniques, and all that. But ultimately, my view is that the purpose of meditation is the rediscovery of your true nature.
Yeah.
And in a lived, in the moments, as a direct living experience, and meditation is the reintroduction to that.
And there's different levels of that, as in there's, let's say, I don't want to say beginner as a pejorative, but there's the first stages
beginner,
of that.
Intermediate, advanced,
the first stages of that are something like using a technique to get out of one's mind.
Well, it's like having an object. I think for people who are new to something like meditation, you can't just introduce someone to the non-conceptual space of pure awareness. It's just the mind, the habit of the mind to grasp objects. Is there's no way that ambiguity that we're talking about, that openness, the non-grasping openness, is going to be available. So you start by using the mind, that grasping quality of mind, to focus on one object, a subtle object, perhaps like a mantra would be,
and not an object that leads you to more thought. So an object that in itself is innocent.
Yes,
it's innocent of content. Let's say.
Semantic content. Yeah. So you can't think about it. It doesn't mean anything. So mantras are good at that level. And it allows the mind to get used to focusing on a simple, non-conceptual object, but it's an object.
It's still an
because
object.
It needs an object. It needs an object for a while, and that can become subtler and subtler, the qualities of that object.
Yeah. And also then there can be an introduction of things like awareness of breath, which is still object, but this is maybe a little bit more subtle in it's less of a object that is attentive to the mind. It's more of an object that is attentive to the felt system. Let's say.
So you can observe the breath.
Yeah, exactly.
And that becomes a point of focus, observing the object. Let's call it objective. It's not like an object. It can be. I mean, some people start off watching candle flames and that kind of
but it's
thing.
not like necessarily a material object.
No. But it's a phenomenal object. It can be a subtle object. So as you say, you got from something like a mantra, then you hit the breath, maybe in more things, and then perhaps you can I would say another step further. Another subtler object is beingness, the sense of your own presence. Yeah. Nisargadatta will call it the I am, the sense of I am. Yeah. You could say presence. There's a sense of the aliveness that's at the heart of your experience. And once you identify that as a subtle experience, you can use that as an anchor to ground yourself to that subtle experience, subtler experience. And then later, I mean, because ultimately the once one becomes familiar with these subtler and subtler objects, just the sense I am, that just drops into the field of awareness itself.
Yeah, not an object.
Not even
no longer.
Object,
it's a subject. It's the almost like the spotlight turns from outward to the object, inward to that which is the spotlight itself. So the awareness.
Where are you knowing from?
The awareness of the breath, the awareness of the sense of I am, the awareness of sense of existence, awareness of a mantra.
Awareness, and then simply for awareness of it.
And at that point, it's not a doing. It's not an assertion of awareness. That is still a subtle objectification, not objectification, but a subtle object. I am aware. There's still that subtle object there, rather than it's not an assertion. It's not a tension of assertion. It's a rest into that knowingness of awareness. So it's not got any mental content of descriptions around it that is necessary.
And I think there's a real, Nisargadatta would say, the I am is and as my recollection of it is that the I am isn't the end goal. It's like the gateway.
Yeah.
Because the true awakening and the true recognition is the absolute it's intuitive. It's something like Rumi would say. I love this quote. He's talking about seeking. He's talking about trying to find God, trying to find the self, trying to find what he's seeking. And he says, I've been knocking on the door. The door opens. I'm on the inside.
Yeah.
I was always on the inside. I'm paraphrasing Rumi, which is an offense, actually. But anyway, my point is that you realize you've been knocking from the inside all the time. You're not looking to focus on the object.
You're not going to awareness.
No.
You are awareness.
That's when it yields. But you've got to quiet the mind. You've got to get the mind to a still where it can observe its own functioning, where awareness itself can come online and be recognized for its own, ever presence.
Yeah, I'm going to put a caveat in there. Temporarily still the mind, because then people go thinking then the mind is the problem, and if there's mind at all, that's the problem. And I'm like, no, it reveals the ground. The temporarily quietening of the mind reveals the ground that you always are and were. And then it doesn't
mind
matter
can
whether
come and go.
Exactly. Content, phenomenal, sensation, world, all the rest of it can come and go once that ground of reality has been established in that knowingness. From there, doesn't matter. So the goal of meditation is not only to quieten the mind. The quietening of the mind is the means to the end,
Exactly.
to reveal what is prior to the mind, what is beyond the mind. Then mind come and go. I say this just because I see so time and time again so many people misunderstanding that the quietening of the mind is the goal of meditation. It's a tool by which is often necessary to reveal the nature of reality.
Yeah.
But in of itself is not the goal of life. That is not awakening to have never have a thought again. Yeah, exactly.
No, but it tends to be a fact that when that ground is discovered, then the mind does tend to lose a lot of its heat.
It does.
And thinking, a large majority of the thinking that most people, engage in is
unnecessary,
pathological, but unnecessary.
I use this little example,
and it falls away. Yeah,
I use this little example for some people, because I think it illustrates the idea quite well in a humorous manner. And this is like the mind is like a salesman that constantly coming to your door, and he's selling something you absolutely don't need. I don't know, dirty socks, and yet you keep buying the dirty socks that the salesman is selling. The mind is selling. And so, of course, you're a sure thing. He's going to keep coming back and again and again and again. But once you recognize that you don't need those dirty socks, you don't need what the salesman is selling, eventually he gives up, at least somewhat. He might, for the first week, he might come once a day instead of several times a day. And then maybe as he realizes not buying the thing he's selling, it lessens and lessens and lessens. So I think when the belief in the mind as primary, as identity is dissolved or sufficiently seen through, the mind naturally over time does quieten down, because it like the salesman, it's not needed to be there anymore, and so it gives up in a sense. It's not necessary, or the belief that it's necessary for life itself is seen through. So it does naturally quieten down. That seems to be across the board for most people, although I would say there are some people that have less of that happening in their life and others that have more of that happening. So it just, to me, shows that it doesn't in itself doesn't actually matter whether there's a lot of mind there or not, once
Well,
you have recognized your nature.
yeah, I think you're right.
I think all of this is to say for me that meditation practice is something that a lot of people don't want to do.
Good. Brought back to the originating point of this whole discussion was that, in my view, my experience, meditation should be enjoyable. Because
Glad we got back to that. Yes.
Because as the progressive rediscovery of our true nature, that the experience of true nature is blissful. It's peaceful. It's open. It's charming, and so progressively heading towards that. In your experience, so if you're holding tight or you're pushing away, or
I think effort is
or introducing great effort into it, it just adds strain, which is just leads the whole experience to be unpleasant, and therefore you're not going to come back to the meditation seat.
I think patience is where I see effort comes in, is where people become impatient and they're looking for goals. They're looking for something to achieve. And actually, I think meditation is very much about coming back. It's like a noticing and a returning, or a noticing and let going. It's a constant compass point to oneself. That's not effort filled. That is persistent. And I think people sometimes don't know the difference, or don't recognize the difference. That that you're not being asked to make effort here. You're being asked to be persistent and patient.
Right. So, you're right, and it's interesting. Yet when we think about meditation, and I know there are sort of universal, let's say, practices that everyone can do, whatever. But I see the tendency of a seeker, someone on a spiritual path, beginning spiritual practice, to someone who's let's say further along, who's done it for longer, who's had more of a greater insight through practice, greater clarity. Early on, and I speak from my own experience here as that seeker who's gone through that whole experience. And my first experience of meditation was me just trying really hard to hold my focus on some object, whatever that was, keeping the body absolutely still, not yielding. Oh my God, it was a nightmare. No joy in it, and to what end? But the idea is somehow that spiritual practice is about mastery of your will over the object, over the spiritual object. And it was only when I kind of got introduced to a different and better way, which in itself marked is a line of progress, where you realize that in some sense, in a big sense, it's less about taking control and more about the extent to which you can take control and master, and the more about the true mastery is about how much can you let go, release, allow.
Yes.
And that shows up as the line of spiritual development progresses. It becomes more and more about allowing, more and more about accepting, releasing,
less about doing, more about being.
More about being. Until the end, the doer completely dissolves.
Yeah.
And there's no doer, no doing. Just the reality.
Just a happening.
But, a good signpost of whether your, meditation is progressing is, is it pleasant? Is it allowing you to settle into your deeper, more peaceful nature?
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that you can't have meditations that are fraught with stuff coming up, and actually it's those are, I would say, necessary and part of the process too. So I want to distinguish between unpleasant content and actually the ability to not identify with that content and come back to the awareness of that content, come back to the beingness with it all. And that is what's pleasant. I don't want to suggest that you won't ever have bad thoughts or content that is unpleasant, because that again is another misunderstanding I see people sort of take up and believe in, that, you know, oh, well, I had all this sort of crazy mind stuff going on that I need to get rid of. I've got to have positive thoughts, not negative thoughts. And I'm like, well, actually, it's the ground underneath all of that is being pointed to. And it's the ground underneath all of that allows and accepts and has room for even all of the content, regardless of whether it is good or bad, actually. So it's not switching out negative thoughts for positive thoughts.
And a good point you made earlier was about, you know, I think we're in some sense talking about the practicalities of meditation. And also what comes to mind is the technique of something like centering prayer. And there's the idea, let's say, with this is that, you know, the intention is to sit quietly and be the abiding observer, let's say. I think there's different modes here, but let's just abide in simplicity. And you don't need to hold that. It's about how you respond then to the inevitable arising of a thought.
Yeah.
A thought will arise there, and before you know it, you're thinking.
Yes.
And, you know, and if you come at this with the wrong approach, you go, oh my God, I'm thinking, I shouldn't be thinking. Oh, I need to redouble my efforts and stop thinking.
But that's more thinking.
And try to hold, but that's more thinking. And the answer is,
that's going further down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. So the real answer is to notice and return.
Yeah.
You know, what's your point? So we talked about points of focus. You know, is it a mantra you're using? And when you find yourself, you know, through no fault of your own, caught up in a series of
thinking
happens. All the technique, the method is really just when you notice that, just to return gently to your point of focus, to your point of attention, to your desired meditative point. Point of attention.
We were both TM as transcendental meditation. Yeah. That was effectively
it could be the breath. You could be just notice breathing, notice in, out, notice in, out. Oh, well, I need to go out and do that. Oh, that movie I watched earlier was doing that. Oh, I'm thinking. Okay, back to the breath.
Yeah, it's an innocent.
Just gentle. Yeah. There's no recrimination you need to add to the fact that.
And there's where the no effort is.
That's where the no effort, because you just simply allow the attention to come back. Now, in centering prayer, slightly different. But it's the same. It's rather than notice and return. It's more like notice and release. You know, and although that is effectively a return to the open awareness, the open presence, that is the ground of the practice.
Yeah, I mean, you could say notice, release, return. I mean, these are,
and in effect that becomes such an automatic process. Just the act of noticing is, oh, I'm gripping, and the hand ungrips.
Yes.
And I loved that. It was Thomas. Is it Thomas Keating? Father Thomas. Yes. Thomas Keating?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it? Yeah. Anyway, Father Keating. I think he would taught his centering prayer to a nun. I mean, this is probably so many people know this story, but I love it. He taught his method of centering prayer to a nun, and you know, after the first session, she comes to him and says, "Oh, I can't bear it. I'm just thinking all the time. I'm thinking. I'm always having to come back. I'm just thinking. This thought comes back, and he goes, how wonderful. 10,000 opportunities to return to God.
Beautiful.
You know, and it's...
I love that. It gave me shivers there.
Right? Just the opportunity. Oh, I'm out. Oh, I can come back. Oh, I'm in that thought. When you know... And the thing is, and it's something to mention, you can't help thinking. Thinking happens, as you said. Thinking happens. You have to just be forgiving and non-recriminatory to the thoughts
yeah,
that are arising, and just simply gently return.
This is what I said. I think I said it to you yesterday or the day before, and I've said it many times to other people. Infinite patience and infinite forgiveness, they need to come hand in hand. The infinite patience to keep returning, and the infinite forgiveness to recognize that it's part of the process to go off into thoughts again. So you can't have one without the other, almost there. You can't have infinite patience without infinite forgiveness, because you will inevitably, the nature of the habitual mind and conditioning is going to drive you back off into those habits, into those ruts of being, let's say.
And the thing is, you can't let go, let's say release, or you can't return to presence, let's say that, until you notice that until you notice that you're not there.
Yes, exactly.
And
you couldn't notice that even a millisecond before it happened. And so where's the recrimination there? Yeah. Oh, I should have noticed earlier.
You did it. You returned the moment, gently returned the moment you noticed.
Yeah.
And then you could go off immediately the next second and be gone again.
Exactly.
But then I'm gone again.
Yeah. And so actually, when you're not in resistance to this, as in you don't imagine it should be different. When you're in complete and utter clear recognition and clarity of this, it's actually a joy, and that's the nun guy, him saying, "Oh, you get to meet God."
10,000 opportunities to return to God.
That's actually what wells up in my heart right now, is this sense of when you realize and recognize this process for what it is. There's the charm, there's the beauty of it, there's the sort of the falling in love with it. It's a non-resistance to it, because you see that what is there to resist? This is the nature of life.
Well, this is it. I think this is where, like a practice, like a sandboxed meditation practice, or centering prayer.
In this.
It's this. You say, well, I'm going to do this 20 minutes. I'm going to do 30 minutes, an hour, twice a day, once a day, whatever it is. You say, as long as you follow the formal meditation practice, you follow the clock. But
eventually,
what you're doing is training yourself, right?
Eventually it becomes an informal meditation practice where it spills out into life, into your day. And I think there's room for both informal and formal. But informal is that coming back, or that noticing and returning to one's nature in every moment, in each and every moment. It's a who was it? I think it was Candace of Denver.
Yeah. She's from the Dzogchen tradition.
Yeah.
And the basic instruction in that tradition is short moments of open awareness, practiced frequently, become permanent.
Yeah, and so this is the description to me. I mean, this is obviously set into a practice, but it's a description of informal meditation.
Returning to presence, returning to prayer, and this is where, when we talk about beginning and immediate advance, whatever, however you want to look at that approach, but someone who then has established a practice, and seeking is characterized in my eyes, certainly in my experience and what I've observed, in progressively more time, energy, commitment to these practices, and at a certain point the practices become, okay, I'm going to just be doing this in every moment, whenever it occurs to me.
They're not practices anymore. Well, they're descriptions of your natural.
Yeah, but there's a step before that. I'm talking about where
you've
gone, right, I've been doing my meditation. I do my meditation. I do an hour in the morning.
I come in and I come out of. Then I go back to normal life.
But what I found for me, it wasn't post meditation, because I was still engaged in formal practice, but pre-awakened, I was just vigilant always throughout the day, that I was aware of presence, my own presence, present moment, return to the now, return to the presence. And you can go and live your life and but the moment you go, you remember, it occurs to you, you make that choice to return.
So it's no longer just on your meditation mat for your 20 minutes or your hour or whatever it might be.
It's whenever it occurs to you, because you can't hold. It's not about holding. It's just whenever it occurs to you, you make that choice to return to the now, return to the moment.
Because actually our natural state is not attention. It's it's natural.
It's flowing.
It says it right there in the word.
Yeah.
And so if your aim in meditation has tension behind it, it's not pointing to the natural state. It's not pointing to the ground of being, because the ground of being isn't attention, isn't a holding, is actually completely the opposite of that. It's an opening. It's the open palmed to life, and that's what meditation is aiming to point to fundamentally. I believe good meditation, anyway, is trying to point to the nature of your own self, which is that of openness, is repose, is a non-tension with life.
I love that. Cynthia Bourgeot speaks about it in regard to centering prayer. It seems to be coming up because it's such a beautiful practice. Actually, it's all about release, release, release. And she talks about during that practice, you're flexing the muscle of release. You know,
Beautiful.
it's wherever you notice there is that tension, you release, and you're learning that you're training that muscle of release. So at a certain point, as you say, it's not a case of close fist, then open it, close fist, then open it. At a certain point, the hand remains open.
Yeah.
Life then flows through you. There's no
Resistance.
And if there is, if it's noticed in the system where there's some tightening, just that act of awareness of an attention on noticing that just the muscle has been practiced, it just releases immediately. So life becomes a flowing wakefulness.
Yep.
So yeah, the progressiveness now for a long time it feels like you're choosing to do it, choosing to release,
and making effort, not
choosing to return, choosing to notice.
Exactly. Persistence. I don't want to call it effort, but there's persistence there.
I think it's a commitment, isn't it? And
exactly.
I think that
an earnestness.
I remember, in the meditation times, it was, so you'd have, the practice is this sort of settling, and then a thought would inevitably arise, not always. Sometimes it can be busy, sometimes not, but that was part of the process. And so as the mind comes up on that thought, and then you go, oh, I'm thinking, you just then release that and come back to the presence, come back to the point, whatever it is. I forgot where I was going. Where was I going with that?
Don't look at me.
Anyway, it was so nice as I'm talking about it. I'm like, oh, this is so nice. This is nice. It becomes a way of being that. So the commitment. That's what I was talking about. That, if when you notice that you're, let's say, caught up in a thought, that's your choice. If you then go, hey, well, yeah, or maybe I'll just keep thinking along these lines, then you're not meditating anymore. You've stopped. And if you go, no, I'm going to come back to that defines whether you're meditating or not. So meditation, and by extension, let's say persistent notice and return, practicing, returning to presence, and your daily thing. It's all about the commitment. It's all about the choice you make to continue to return,
and
to continue to release, continue to return.
And here's where we go into non-doership and choicelessness. It's a choicelessness. It's a choiceless choice as to whether you're inclined to do that or not.
Yeah.
There's where the non-doership aspect comes into that. It looks like a choice. It smells like a choice. It acts like a choice. But it's whether there is even the inclination to sit down and meditate is in itself a symptom of that, right? And we already talked about that. Symptom
of spiritual practice is
a symptom of consciousness arising within you to know itself. Yeah. So it absolutely, on the surface level of it, is a choice. But whether you are inclined to have
Yeah.
that appearance of that choice or not is where the non-doer, the deeper truth is
the
found.
deeper recognition that what the ego claims as its spiritual path, effort, practice is ultimately revealed to be simply the universal awareness unfolding and unpacking spontaneously to rediscover it and re-embody its own nature.
So this is how we can talk, and I think it sometimes confuses people. It certainly has in the past for me. You can be speaking to these different truths, these different levels of truth. On one side, on the relative sense of it, you've got the choice. On the deep, absolute sense of it, there is no choice. And both are simultaneously true in their own relation to themselves.
Well, there are, if you look in the Buddhist tradition, they have these concepts of provisional truths and definitive truths.
Yeah.
So if you're talking about the actions of the seeker, the methods a seeker might employ,
well, the doer
and the doing, however spiritual, it's a provisional truth.
And is very helpful,
and it's absolutely
on its own level.
Yes,
very
it's
helpful.
necessary on its own level.
To deny that you can do anything is very disempowering for a lot of people who believe themselves to be in that level of their insight.
You have to meet the seeker where the seeker
Absolutely.
comes, and there's no point. But at the same time, you're also introducing the fullness. You talk about leaving the breadcrumbs and saying, at this point, we're going to talk about introduce a meditation practice. You're going to talk about the subtlety of that, or you talk about self-inquiry, how to approach that. What are you looking at? Who's looking? Whatever.
All of that.
And they might require a practice in order to culture, purify, stabilize, certain aspects of this teaching. But then, and so you're instructing at some level,
you're instructing
or you're at
a
least
person.
suggesting where they should look and how they should approach.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you need to introduce them. But ultimately,
and that's where I give those breadcrumbs.
This is just happening. You'll come to see that actually, you
were never doing any of it.
You think you're doing. There was no one you're doing it, and there's nothing happening. It's just simply what's arising.
So I think it's, for me, I find that method of introduction much more one kind to the person, but two, more importantly, in some ways, it leads to a much more integrated recognition and realization, because it doesn't deny the humanness. It doesn't deny the or not lesser truths, provisional truths. It doesn't deny those. It includes them, and to me, that is absolutely very, very important to do, because if you don't do that, and it's not necessary for everyone for sure, but in swathes, it's very useful to swathes of people to do that, because otherwise there can be this subtle duality that is born, this subtle denial of the humanity and the human who is practicing, who is doing, who is, has a goal of awakening, or has these sort of
that's how awakening shows up.
Exactly. And to deny
we're all
that,
playing our non-doing parts in all of this.
Exactly. And so to deny that, I think, can cause other types of problems, put it that way.
Yeah.
No,
it's So there's definitely it's funny how in some ways, even with the sheer variety of human experience, particularly spiritual experience and awakening experience, there are laws of nature, let's say, principles and themes that unfold and unpack. It and I use the analogy of like a tree. The way a tree gets to the fullness of itself and gives fruit and seed, It has to go through all its developmental stages.
Yeah.
It can't skip. It can't be a seed and then skip sapling and be a full grown tree. It has to be a sprout, a
there are
sapling,
some
a tree.
trees that go through that process quicker, and others that go through that slower.
I
And
agree.
there's the unique expression of it.
True. No, so we and also speaking about that, this is why I'm an apologist for the idea that spiritual awakening is simply a natural process that's inherent to all sentient beings. We it's not some strange magical
Elusive.
well, it's rare for sure, but it's a function of it's available. It's the Buddha nature. It's available to all. We all are in our true nature is that. And for a while, the delusion, the illusion of personhood, and that's not to deny the presence of that embodied reality.
No. But we're not only that.
But we're not only that, and that is also temporary and albeit we can't bypass it.
No.
You can't. You can try, but we have to.
Many do.
We're consciousness having a what is it? We're not humans. What is that quote? No, I'm not even going to bother. We're consciousness having a human experience, not humans having a. That's right. We're spirits having a human experience, not human having a spiritual experience. We have to recognize our universal, boundless nature, in which then we experience the totality through the lens of the human organism.
Yeah, because without that fundamental recognition of what we essentially are, we are lost to the content, thinking it to be permanent, and therefore afraid of its demise. There's where you get the fear of death.
Yeah, it's
the existential fear of
the absolute identification with the body as the ground, as the true subject. It's like, nope, we're not the body, but we as consciousness as being use the body, enjoy the body, suffer the body.
We are consciousness embodied. It is it's flowing through this experience that we call a human experience, to taste itself as that.
Right on.
And that is a deep, deep learning that happens, I feel.
Well, I think I like that. There was some story about a bird that's born and lives entirely on the wing. It's and the only time it touches the ground is when it dies. And it's a strange analogy, but no matter how the idea that I'm trying to explain or describe is that no matter how long the human reality is experienced just as such, ultimately one day it will end, but we shall remain as awareness, as consciousness.
We know this experience more than we give ourselves credit for, though, all the time. Even sleep is a beautiful example of just how much we know this experience of not existing as the person, as the body. We go into the dream state at nighttime, and we're in a whole world. We may not even recognize ourselves as ourselves at that moment. We're certainly not the body necessarily at that moment. So I think people know that of themselves, whether they consciously know that in the way that we're speaking of with spiritual awakening or not. but they know what it is to be alive without the identification of I am the body, I am the mind. So we all know this so much so it's so ordinary that we dismiss those moments in life where there is a withdrawal of the senses, a withdrawal of thought, a withdrawal of body, a withdrawal of world. Some will call that samadhi. And yet still existence is. So we actually know this far more than most people would ever grasp.
And I would also say, I mean, we talked last time about, or one of the times, about flow. And, you know, one of the characteristics of flow is complete self-forgetfulness.
Yeah.
You know, it's this balance between, you know, intention and surrender, complete absorption in the present moment, total self-forgetfulness. There's no kind of ego. There's mind doesn't really play much part in it. It's all about just pure existence, pure feel, boundless. I think people, you know, when they talk about flow, and I see a lot of people who are really into flow, flow hacking and all that stuff, they're missing the point. They're missing the point that flow, this characteristically self-forgetful, absorbed, blissful, you know, it feels good.
Yeah. Time doesn't exist.
Non-self-reflective. Again, they're limiting it by their perception. They're trying to utilize it. So you know, outside of trying to get in a state of flow, it's like, no, you are a state of flow, and it's got the cart before the horse again.
But we experience that I mean, we talked about this last
week.
But
flow is the natural condition.
But let's just, instead of just about flow, but just this knowledge of existence prior to our thoughts about that existence.
That's why I point to flow as the self-forgetfulness of it. Yeah. That characteristic self-forgetfulness. There's no...
Yeah, I mean, you're washing the dishes or you're driving a car, you know, I don't know, you're walking out in nature. There's all sorts of, even if they're flashes of moments, but there are all of these moments in your day where you exist prior to your conception of yourself, prior to the identity of yourself.
It's just noticing the gap, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about we're probably talking to most people who would perhaps not consider themselves to be spiritual, on a spiritual path, engaging in any spiritual practice. That's what you're talking about as well.
In this
just
context,
regular people who don't even notice, who do or don't notice that there are these gaps.
Yeah.
Where there's no thought, but they are.
Yes.
They exist as being. They exist. Existence is, and they're aware. Yeah. That's the thin end of the wedge, you know.
It is.
That
the
gap
right
just
there.
That gap, just that spot where you go, what was that? I wasn't thinking, you know, I wasn't engaged, but I was aware. And I existed. I'm not my thoughts. Maybe that's the great, you know, aha, where you recognize I'm not my thoughts. I can't be because I exist when I'm not thinking.
Yeah.
As and what then? And there's the discovery. What is?
Most people, that goes unnoticed. Those gaps
unbroken thought stream seems to be the...
Yeah, it goes unnoticed. And so then you introduce them to the idea that you're not your thoughts. And it's like, what? There's a big question mark there, because as far as they're concerned, all the attention, all the spotlight goes on just the content, the thoughts.
The mind skips habitually, for most people, skips over those gaps. Yeah. As you say, they're there.
Because they're seen as invaluable. They're seen as not anything to, like, or it's only, we're so habituated and conditioned to object orientated. So that's where the value is, the good stuff, the shiny objects in life.
Yes.
We want all that. We just disregard all the seeming stuff that isn't that.
Yeah. Well, the mind just does it so habitually because awareness is ever present, and yet what's the problem? People don't notice it. But it's, as I say, it's there. I mean, and it's there. And this is why things like flow is a bit of why I bring up flow, but it's also like the experience. Say you're listening to some music, you're listening to some, opera or whatever it is, or that you're something sublime, something beautiful, and you're completely lost in it. And so this whole experiencing is happening. You're aware, and this beautiful experiencing is happening. You're not thinking.
Yeah.
So we know these states where you're not thinking, but we don't give it credit. No. And it requires. I mean, one of the fundamental teachings of awakening is about awareness, knowing itself, awareness of awareness by awareness. Mm-hmm. Just the awareness of its own nature in itself as the ground, as the foundation.
Yeah. As, it's funny, the language there, and, we could talk for hours about language, I feel. But it's like, it's funny talking about language. I just lost all the train of thought of what I was about to say.
That's a bit ironic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's completely gone.
Language, yeah, you gotta jump right in.
It was something around the I. There was no I there. When you're lost, there's no I there. There you go. Language of identity I was talking about. Right. So it's like the seat of identity shifts from the person to awareness. But this is why I brought up language, because it's not that the seat of identity switches from one to the other. It's that identity that there was dissolves. So it's a non-identity. Awareness isn't an identity. I don't identify as awareness.
No, you are.
I recognize that I am awareness.
Yes,
it's not an identity.
No.
Identity is an object, is a mask that we put on, a piece of clothing that we put on and say, I am this temporarily. So it's when I say, because I use that phrase quite a lot, and it's not a very accurate phrase. That's why I'm saying language is tricky. Sure. The seat of identity switches from the person to awareness. It points out something, but it's not entirely accurate.
It's not strictly true that because the process of identification isn't even present. The process of identification, as is typically known as identification with some object.
Yeah, and so it's really a disidentification. Yeah. It's a dissolving of the identity.
Of the identification.
So it really the heart of being is not an identity.
But then you end up with this sort of we talked about this before. The classic let's say line of separation between typically Buddhist thought and Vedantic thought, which is Vedic or Vedantic or Advaita would say Atma, self is, albeit not a personal self.
Yeah, not small self, big self.
So it's to say like the ground of the fundamental reality is Atma, and Atma, the self is also Brahma, the universal Brahman, the universal self, let's say. Whereas Buddhism typically would say anatta, no self, and leave it at that. It's say, dissolve and, dismantle and see through all the constructions that give rise to the illusion of self. But then they wouldn't say, oh, what's left constitutes self, because
as you pointed out to me the other day,
except that the Nirvana Sutra talks about the nature of Buddha nature as a form. It's a kind of self. I mean, it's like there's always a bit of a frustration with a Buddhist insistence on anatta, but there's so many schools of Buddhism, to be fair, and many of them speak of not all of them, but many of them speak of ultimate nature.
Yeah,
Rigpa and the great perfection and Buddha nature and all these kind of things,
or
which basically constitutes the ground of being, which is synonymous with self.
Which Ramana talked about the I, just to bring it
the
back into
the
recognition of the two differences.
Exactly.
Schools of thought.
Yes, it's the personal I sort of hijacks the universal I, the true self, the true
the true self that says I am, existence is.
Yeah, existence is, and beyond even that.
Yeah, exactly. Before even that assertion, I am.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's lovely. So I think these sort of schools of understanding are ultimately trying to point to the same direct
really
experience, and it's the moment you open your mouth, you're not going to get, you can speak about definitive and what was provisional teachings, and that's a great guide, but the goal here isn't conceptual. The goal isn't intellectual or semantic. The goal is and the reality is experiential. It's existential. It's ontological.
All words are imperfect.
Yeah.
All words are born in a non-dual nature, as in that they point to something.
Fingers pointing to the moon.
But they do point to something. And so when you recognize that, I remember, we'll wrap this up fairly soon, but just to speak of the earlier doors for me, I got a real pain in your ass, so to speak. With
when not long after you had your shift.
Really got because it was like all these words that I had used somehow didn't feel right in my mouth or in my body, like consciousness or universe, or all of them. It's like suddenly I was looking at someone had thrown all the Scrabble pieces on the floor, and I'm like, what does it all mean anymore? And there was a real readjustment of that for me, and so I got very, very particular about trying to unwind. And I think it's a necessary process, and I see lots of other people go through this. A necessary process of unwinding your concepts around a word to their true nature, to what they're truly pointing to. So you've got an idea of what they're pointing to, and you wake up to the reality of nature, and you go, okay, now I got to dismantle what I thought it was pointing to and reassemble based on the truth of what consciousness means. Not what I thought it meant.
Right.
Not a conceptual overlay of the word consciousness, but the truth of what consciousness points to, the word consciousness points to. Because then once you've gone through that process, you can use whatever words you want. Words are known to be imperfect, and yet you also know they point to something. And that's when, for me, now I'm very free with words in some ways. And sometimes you do have to get very particular and very pedantic and very semantic about what is it you're actually pointing to. And you have to do that using words. But you're always pointing to what the word, beyond what the words are saying. You're pointing to the direct recognition, the direct cognition of that.
Yes, the experiential reality.
And then you can use words much freer because you recognize that they're all imperfect, and yet they do point to something.
I always said, in terms of, provisional teaching, that you in this regard to spiritual teaching, particularly, quacking like a duck would, if that gets if that gets someone to see that thing that they're aiming to, the underlying truth of reality, it doesn't matter.
In their own
and that's why
experience.
I think in the direct experience, it doesn't matter what it is. You're not looking for perfect teachings. You're just looking for those. Because there are no perfect teachings. That skillful means by which you're pointing directly to the experience that you're pointing to, and grokking that experience. I think that's why, I think that's why. I'm not a great expert on this, but I think Zen has some, interesting, approaches, things like koans that just confuse the mind and stop the mind. And also, surprises, sort of, and things like crazy wisdom teachings that, are just very unpredictable, and they just put someone into a state of no mind. You ask an odd question, or you make a strange gesture, and suddenly the mind is stilled for a moment, and then you have, a kensho, a glimpse of the underlying reality.
Yeah.
So you can do that very intentionally as a sort of, a technical thing. You could say to someone, notice when one thought ends, but before the next one arises, what's there? What's that experience like?
Mm.
And so they can experience the gap, the non-conceptual gap. That's foundational. Or you could,
which we think is a gap, and it looks like a gap, but eventually is revealed to not be the gap. It's the
not
underlying.
a gap, it's the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah. I ain't the gap. Yes.
But it looks like the gap to start with.
It looks like a gap to start with because we're so used to relating to thoughts.
Yeah, content. I think we'll
leave it there.
I think that particular topic is one that we can explore further at a later date. The gap.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's it for today. We'll say adieu.
Until next time.
Until next time. Bye for now.